Welcome to Leaving Nothing to Chance, your go-to podcast where we bring you insights from some of the most influential voices in small business and personal development. Each week, we dive deep into conversations with top thought leaders, authors, and business moguls from around the world, sharing their secrets to success and strategies for growth. Tune in for exclusive content that will inspire, motivate, and equip you to take your journey to the next level. This is Leaving Nothing to Chance.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to Ink and Insight, our show on authors. James, the only rule we have on this is the author has to be breathing.
Okay.
It's
So good.
Are you qualified? Yeah, I'd love to interview James Joyce or somebody like that, but they're not here anymore. So your book, I don't know, maybe I Love You, our long format show has been a big hit. Everybody who's heard it's come back and said, wow, just some terrific points. And of course, this was a book that you wrote during the last election, the Trump-Harris election that just finished last November, and it details your journey from the Northeast back to Oregon, where you currently reside. And just tell everybody a little bit about why you were moved to do this.
To begin, the title, I don't know, maybe I love you, came from a conversation with my younger brother during COVID. I think it was in the beginning of COVID, and he was arguing with me about something, and I finally just said, Kenny, I don't know, maybe I love you, man. And he said later, I hate when you do that. How can I keep the argument going when you do that? And it was like a lightning bolt went off. And I said, yeah, how can you keep the argument? You can't. Because when there's no opposition, there's just the flow. I started talking about this a lot. And then I was on the East Coast. I was doing a concert tour actually. And I met with this friend of mine and his wife, who I didn't realize at the moment, in that moment, was a publisher. She had a company, and she asked if I'm writing anything. I said, no, I'm not going to write any more books. I'm done with that. But if I were to, then I told her the story about my brother, and she said, if you write that book, I will publish it, because that is so needed today. We need to find a way to come back together, to depolarize. So I started writing that night. As you said, I was traveling down the East Coast and doing this concert, and I would talk to people who agree with me, people who don't agree with me, people who are voting one way or another, to find out more about what we can do to unify. And it ultimately comes down to something you and I talked about before, the pandemic of being right.
Mm-hmm.
We're so convinced that we're right about everything that we don't listen to people and consider the possibility that maybe they have something to teach me. So all of those conversations and the conversations that I continue to have, like this one, they've been showing me that there is a way for us to pull back from the edge of the cliff. And it's simply by doing the things we learned when we were in kindergarten, being nice to each other, being kind and listening. It's very simple.
That pause button that you mentioned in the book. And once again, something we all should do, right? Just breathe instead of jumping down each other's throats. Let the other person say what they're thinking, what's on their mind, whether you agree or disagree. Just hit that pause button instead of attacking them. I think that alone is sage advice, because we see so much of that. You watch a talk show. I talk. Nobody's going to watch them if everybody's in agreement, right? You got to have the different polarities. Otherwise, who's going to watch, right? It's good theater if it's nothing else. But even on those things, sometimes I think, why don't they just let the other person finish what they're saying and then respond to it like an adult, instead of two kids in the playground? And that was something you mentioned, and I thought that was great advice. And I'm instituting that myself with my sister. One sister's on the super far left, and the other sister's kind of a moderate, but more on the left. And then I'm not on the right. I'm just a centrist. I'm just like, I love common sense. Give me common sense. I don't care whether it says D after your name, R after your name, I after your name, or something else. Give me common sense. But I've said with both of them, and I tell them about your book, and they both have listened to the interview, by the way, and loved it, our long form interview. But I said to both of them, I said, let's have an agreement that we're going to let each other finish what we're saying. and then let the other person respond like a tennis match, right? You both can't hit the ball at the same time. Let it come back over the net, and then let the other person say, "What about this?" or "What about that?" and have a conversation and an adult dialogue versus this yelling and screaming that gets nobody anywhere. It just sends everybody's blood pressure up. It's unhealthy physically for us. I thought that was great advice. Let's talk about the journey a little bit, though. So you were in North Conway, New Hampshire when this started, which is, where is that exactly? I know Nashua in that area. Is that kind of there?
I think, yeah, it's north of Nashua. I'd never been there before. I actually drove my van all the way across the US and then drove up to New Hampshire. It's a beautiful area. I really loved it. And it's a small, very beautiful little town. And that's where the journey started. I actually, after that conversation at dinner, went to my van where I was sleeping and just started writing. And then the next morning, I went for coffee and met a man holding a big sign that said, "Vote Trump or else." And I thought, okay, I got to talk to this guy. Let's start here. What does it mean, or else? But I love what you said, that if we just begin by listening to each other, instead of immediately forming in my mind while they're still talking my argument or what I'm going to tell them how they're wrong or what they should do to change their opinion. Just begin by listening. And the title is the whole formula. I don't know, and neither do you. None of us know for sure anything. And so maybe if I do listen, maybe if I don't interrupt you, I'm going to learn something. But if we don't have the foundation of love and respect, we're not going to get anywhere. So I've never written a book where the title is really the whole book. If we just do those three things, we're going to be off to a very good start.
And you've got a great verbiage of the pandemic of being right.
Yeah.
And throughout history, we've seen people who thought they were right, who now we go back to say, were they right? For instance, my wife and I watched a really interesting show that was done in Chicago on the atomic bomb, and now I'm going to forget the name of it. And it was done for TV, and we just watched it a couple of weeks back, and it was like one of those mini series, and they got a lot of stuff in it. If you think of Harry Truman, historically, we think of Harry Truman as a great president, and maybe he was. I don't know. To your point, I don't know if he was. But then you think, what if they had dropped that bomb on an island with no inhabitants just to show the Japanese, hey guys, here's what we could do. We don't want to do it. Maybe we can end this thing at the bargaining table. We don't have to kill hundreds of thousands of people and cause a long-term hepatitis outbreak that still exists in Japan today as a result of those two bombs that we dropped. And I'm not judging Truman one way or another. History judges him. God will judge him, or has judged him. But point being, historically, sometimes we think, I think that person was right because we were told that in school. And there's a lot of other instances. I'm just using that one because it's recent in my case. But love your thoughts on just that pandemic of being. It's brilliant writing. It's just like that could be a series of books, but or lectures or whatever you want to do with it. But the pandemic of being right, did that just pop in your head as you were driving, or conversations with the guy in North Conway, or conversations with people on the other side? Where did that logic come from?
It's a good question. I don't really remember when it first landed, only that there's been so much talk about pandemic over the last 5 or 6 years now, with the coronavirus and everything that happened that we know about. And the idea of pandemic, something has infected us, something has derailed our common sense. And I don't know really when it started. Was it with the pandemic? Was it with the election, the first election that Joe Biden won? People still believe that he didn't win. So they are determined to be right, even though all the evidence points in the other direction. As if there's something noble about being right instead of being happy or getting along with people. So it really does feel like a pandemic. Something has shifted in the last few years where the rightness of our opinions is primary. And I think a lot of it has to do with social media, marketing. Social media, for example, all of the algorithms always point us to what we already believe. It notices where we click, the things that we look at or watch, and gives us more of that. So it's easy to fall into, I am right about this because I've seen so many interviews and heard from so many authorities that tell me I'm right. So I need to convince you now, when the truth is that those are just algorithms telling you what you already believe. So it has to start there. It has to begin with just taking the pressure off the importance of being right and maybe putting more importance on listening, honoring, being kind. What happened to kindness? All of these arguments that we have with people, we throw them out of our lives because they have a different opinion than us. It didn't used to be like that. And so there is a pandemic. And I think the cure is going to be us listening, practicing all the things we learned when we were very young. And maybe if there are enough of us who say, I want to be part of this movement, I want to be part of a depolarizing movement, if there's enough of us doing that, then maybe we can feel the pressure release and we can come back together.
Great thought. Great. And let's hope and pray that that's the case, because the polarizations, it's not helping anybody. It's really not. And frankly, having worked in Washington at one time when I was on a committee in the direct selling field that I'm in for a living, I can tell you most of these politicians could care less about it. They care about you around the election, get your money, support them. And it's not that they don't care about you. They care about the policy that's going to keep them in power and keep them employed. Frankly, at the end of the day, it's a job. It's a good job and it pays really well. So at the end of the day, do they really care about the rank and file? Maybe they don't. I don't want to judge them on that. But at the end of the day, when you're fighting with your brother, your sister, your cousin, your best friend about these things and destroying relationships, they don't, the people you're arguing about could care less whether you live or die. They don't even know you exist. That, I think that's the fallacy of the whole thing. But let's stay on something else though, James, on that. Your role model, of course, is St. Francis. And he had an interesting meeting himself, okay, because history does repeat itself. And I didn't know this, so thank you for the education on this, with the Sultan of Egypt in 1219, where different religions, right? Once again, let's go to war, let's kill each other. And he somehow said, hey, let's have a face-to-face meeting. Tell people about that meeting and the results thereof.
Yeah, such a great story. In fact, I've patterned a great deal of my life after that one story. I've always loved St. Francis. I am a Franciscan priest, and I joined the order originally when I was 18, right out of high school. But it was a few years later that I had an experience where I put the peace prayers from the 12 major religions to music, all in 1 hour, all 12 songs in an hour. And these were prayers that had been prayed in Assisi in 1987, or maybe 86, when the leaders of all the different religions of the world came together simply to pray the peace prayer. And they did it because of this story. So, as you said, in 1219, the Crusades between the Christians and the Muslims were really on fire. And Francis just knew in his heart that if he could just sit and be face to face with the Sultan and share his understanding of the message of Jesus, which is the message of love and forgiveness and healing, if he could just do that, the Sultan would get it and he would end the war on his own. And everyone told him, you can't go, that you'll be martyred. The Pope told him that he would be excommunicated. He didn't, that wasn't going to happen. So Francis did. It took him 3 tries to get to the fortress of Damietta, which is in Egypt. This is where the Sultan was and many of his forces were amassed. This is where the battle was taking place. And Francis walks straight up to the gate of Damietta and says, I want to talk to your boss. And of course, he's captured and it doesn't look like it's going to go very well. But the Sultan, upon hearing about this crazy monk who wants to talk to him, he gave him a chance. And they say that Francis was there for 2 weeks, he and a brother Illuminato who was with him. And not only did he meet with the Sultan, but there was also another great spiritual leader that was there named the Fakir al-Din el-Farisi, who was the primary Sufi leader. Sufism is, like Franciscans are an order within the Catholic Church, Sufism is equivalent within Islam. Very peace-loving, open order of mystics, really. People like Rumi. the whirling dervishes, okay? And so Al-Din al-Farisi was also there, and they just saw one another and fell in love. And they learned so many things about each other because they listened. They didn't fall into that trap of the pandemic of being right. They listened to one another. They honored one another. And by the time Francis left, the Sultan sent him with an offer of peace, but the bishop who was in charge of this whole thing said, "No way." And let me tell you one more. I don't think I shared this before, but just to show what can happen when someone like Francis shows up. The Christians were then mobilizing their forces in an area near the Nile River. And the Sultan was very smart. So what he did was he opened the gates of the Nile and flooded this entire region where the Christian army was, to the point that they couldn't move. They were in the mud. Their horses couldn't leave, couldn't get their carts moving, and they were dying. They were starving. So the Sultan sent his soldiers in to feed them. And from that point on, how do you continue a war when they do things like that? One more thing about Francis. I usually pose this question without knowing who this was, but actually, I think I still can. Someone once said, I'll see if you can guess who said this. Someone once said that if we had 10 St. Francis of Assisi, we would not have needed a revolution. Who do you think said that?
Ben Franklin?
Good answer, revolution. But no, it was Vladimir Lenin
Oh, okay.
at that, an atheist.
Yeah.
If
Okay.
we had 10 people who were as committed as Francis was, we wouldn't have needed a revolution. So what I say is we need people like that today. We need people who are committed to peace today. That's why what I'm hoping that will happen is that this book, I don't know, maybe I Love You, will start a movement of people who want to be depolarizers. They can learn these tools, they can practice them. And if there are enough of us doing that, maybe we can be among those people like Vladimir Lenin asked for, people who were like St. Francis, who were so committed that peace will happen on its own.
You know, it's funny. I was in California a few months ago, and we went to the Reagan Library, and there's a room there where he and, oh boy, having a senior moment here.
Gorbachev?
Gorbachev, thank you. Where he and Gorbachev, and it wasn't the actual room where they met, but it like depicted it. And I'm thinking exactly what you're describing. Here were two guys representing two very different groups of people. But all of a sudden, when they met, they realized they actually liked each other. For one thing, as human beings, they respected each other. At the very least, they respected each other. They actually liked each other as men. They actually thought the other guy was, this guy's okay. Got a different point of view on certain things, but he's okay. And he can blow my country up 500 times. So I can blow his country up 500 times. And how's that turn out? Not well. And they did something that was unique at that time to that point. And but I want to ask you one other thing just in this segment, and then we'll continue in our other segment, really more from some of the stories from the books, because there's some great things that happen to you along the road there. But tell me about the canticle. I hope I pronounced that correctly. The canticle of the creatures on St. Francis' deathbed. That's very interesting.
Yeah, the Canticle of the Creatures. Many people are familiar with the prayer of St. Francis, Lord, make me an instrument of your peace. Where there is hatred, let me bring love. Very popular prayer. Unfortunately, Francis did not write that. It was attributed to him, but it was not the author. But there was a prayer, the Canticle of the Creatures, that he did write. It was actually the first thing ever written and published in what we now know as the language of Italian, so the vernacular. And it was written on his deathbed. He was blind, he was dying, and yet he wanted to express his love of the creatures of God, brother sun, sister moon, brother fires, brother wind, mother earth. So he wrote this prayer, the Canticle of the Creatures, and it was meant to be sung. In fact, when he finished it, at that time there was a great dispute going on between the bishop and the mayor of Assisi, and it was getting pretty bad. So Francis taught this prayer to a couple of the friars and told them to go into the town and to sing this, to get the bishop and the mayor together and to sing this to them. By the time they were done singing this to them, they were weeping, they embraced, and the battle was over. And all because this simple man just wanted to praise all of the different ways that in nature that praise God. So it's a beautiful story, and I think it has many lessons we could learn today.
And talk in the book about, which in Hebrew means repairing the world. Kind of what the story you just told, but just elaborate a little bit better. How do we repair this very fractured world, not only here in the United States, but throughout the world? There's so many clashes, civil wars, political parties against each other, juntas taking place, et cetera, et cetera. How do we repair this place once and for all?
I think the first step is to realize that we all have much more in common than we think, more than we have not in common. I remember one of the journeys that I took into a conflict area. I was invited by Saddam Hussein to come to Iraq and to perform the peace concert there at a time when we were very close to another war. And I did the concert in the National Theater there, and afterwards they had this big party that they brought me to where we pretty much just sat around singing Simon and Garfunkel songs. And that was in Baghdad. And I realized at that meeting, that party, that we have so much more in common than we have not in common. And I think if we could just begin there, whether you're left or right or Republican, Democrat, okay, that's fine. But let's look across and realize that the people who have different opinions of me are mainly like me. We want the same thing. We want peace for our families, for the world. We really do want harmony. We just are not very good at finding it when we are stuck in the mud of the pandemic of being. So it begins with respect, it begins with kindness, and it begins with realizing that we have more in common than we think.
And let's talk a little bit, as we wrap up this segment, James, about the worldpeacepulse.com, something that you've started to give people some of the tools that they can utilize, once again, from their families to their neighborhood, to their state, to their community, to their country, etc.
You know, I remember I started that website I was actually going to be doing a big prayer vigil on the border of Israel and Syria. This is when ISIS was really active and things were really going bad in that part of the world. And the idea of a world peace pulse, to have millions of people praying at the same time, sending their love to a conflicted situation in the same moment. I've done this many times in the past. And so I made that my official website, worldpeacepulse.com. But if people want to get more information on the book, they can go to de-polarize.com. So de-polarize.com. There's a little survey there people could take. We can send them more information on being involved in this depolarizing movement. It's going to take all of us. It's not going to take one or two people. It may take those 10 people like St. Francis to get things going. But once we can get this rolling, we're going to keep it rolling and find the solution that has been eluding us until now.
And frankly, it's about time, because this is not, as we both know, we and I are about the same age. This is not the first conflict between people in our country about things. But what we have to do, to your point, bring it down a notch, folks. Like, we're not serving each other well, and most importantly, we're not serving ourselves well. I mean, people are hurting their health because of politics. That's silly.
That's right. Crazy.
So, folks, I want to thank you, James, for the first part of this, and we'll resume with part 2 next week. Actually, we're going to do that now, folks, but we're going to take a pause, give you a chance to metabolize some of this, because there's a lot of information, and we're going to talk more about about the book and some of James's travels as he drove across the United States. I don't know what's happening to my voice here. Excuse me. And some of the people that he met, some of the situations he found himself in during a very interesting time in our history. James, if you'd be so gracious, we'll pick up for part 2 here.
Thank you for tuning in. Be sure to check back weekly for more exciting episodes. And don't miss Ink and Insight every Wednesday, where we celebrate iconic authors and dive into their impactful works.